Only in Kentucky can a man build a house shaped like a goose and be home to a folk artist who influenced Bob Dylan. Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm learning a little bit more about Kentucky, one county at a time, all 120 of them. And today, I'm learning about Perry County. Perry County sits deep in eastern Kentucky's Appalachian Plateau in the region geologists call the Eastern Kentucky Coalfield. Not a gentle country. These are steep forested ridges and narrow hollers carved over millions of years by river cutting through sandstone and shale. The North Fork and Middle Fork of the Kentucky River run through the county. Elevations swing from around 750 feet in the valleys to over 2,500 feet at the ridgelines. So there's no flat fields here. And that fact, more than any law, any election, any decision made in Frankfort, has shaped everything that has ever happened in the county. The area sat on the edge of Shawnee and Cherokee land long before the first Euro-Americans showed up. Archaeological surveys have found scattered flint tools and evidence of Paleo-Indian and Woodland peoples moving through the river valleys. The first Euro-American to stick around was a man from Virginia named Elijah Combs. In 1795, Combs traveled into the mountains and built a cabin on the North Fork of the Kentucky River. This was a temporary structure just enough to establish a legal claim to the land. Then he walked back to Virginia, married a woman named Sarah Roark, and came back. When he came back, though, he built a proper two-story log structure close to the river. People started calling it the Old Log Fort, and for years, court was held inside it. Elijah Combs went by the title General. He dressed in full regimental uniform as the commander of the local militia, though historians note there's actually no evidence of any actual military command. He was the jailer, he was the magistrate, he was the sheriff. He served in the Kentucky state legislature. He was, by every available account, the kind of man who showed up everywhere and made himself indispensable to everyone. And he built his life around a salt lick on a river in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. And he named the town after Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. Perry had never been anywhere near Kentucky. He was a naval officer from Rhode Island, but in September of 1813, he did something that made him a national legend. On Lake Erie, facing the British fleet, Perry's flagship, the Lawrence, was shredded by cannon fire. Most of the crew was dead or wounded. Rather than surrender, Perry climbed into a small rowboat and had himself rowed through active fire to another ship, the Niagara. He took command, turned back into the fight, and broke the British line. The British fleet surrendered, and Perry sent a dispatch to General William Henry Harrison that became kind of a badass line. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Well, Elijah Combs heard that story, and he named his town after that man. On March 2nd, 1821, the Kentucky legislature made it official. Perry County was carved from portions of Clay and Floyd counties, becoming the 68th county in the state. The county seat was first called Perry Courthouse. By 1854, the post office had renamed it to Hazard, and the city was incorporated officially in 1884. For the first several decades of its existence, getting to Hazard from the outside world meant either a 45-mile river trip down the North Fork or a 2-week trip over the surrounding mountains. There were no roads really, and by the time the Civil War arrived, Hazard had maybe a dozen families living there. The war was messy here, as it was across most of Appalachia. Perry County leaned Union, but formal battle lines really meant nothing in the mountains. The most documented engagement was the Battle of Leatherwood, a skirmish in October of 1862 near Cornettsville. Confederate and Union forces fought over control of local salt works there. Salt preserved food, cured hides, and kept livestock alive through the winter, so whoever controlled the salt controlled the local economy. The battle there was small by war standards, but it did matter, and every fourth weekend in October, people still gather near Cornettsville to reenact it. The bigger wounds of the war weren't from the battlefield. They were from the community divisions, the guerrilla raids, and what came after. And what came after in Perry County was the French-Eversole feud. Joseph Eversole was a merchant and landowner and one of the most prosperous men in the county. Ben French was a rival businessman moving into the same territory. What started as a commercial dispute over who controlled the trade coming into Perry County escalated into something the county had no mechanism to actually try to stop. Both men armed their people. The killing started. One side would ambush a man on the road, the other side would shoot someone at a store corner. The violence ran for years through the 1880s, spread across the hollers and ridgelines, and killed dozens of people. The state militia eventually had to intervene to end it. And then, in 1890, someone burned the courthouse down, allegedly feuds. A new brick courthouse went up by 1908. All of that, the isolation, the feuding, the thin economy, was about to be changed by a single event. In 1912, the Louisville-Nashville Railroad reached Hazard. A journalist named Lewis Pilcher visited Hazard just months after the railroad arrived and wrote a long account of what he found. The town was in a state of barely controlled frenzy. New brick buildings were going up, the Hotel Beaumont had just opened, 3 stories, a basement barbershop, hot water heat, electric lights. There were 30 lawyers practicing in town. Stenographers were in Pilcher's words busy as bees in the clover. He noted that the population had more than doubled in a single year and it was still climbing. And then he complained about the muddy streets and the freight rate discrimination by the L&N Railroad, which he felt was strangling commerce. So Pilcher had opinions. But the railroad hadn't just brought commerce. It had opened the door to coal. Within a decade of the railroad's arrival, Perry County was a major coal field. Dozens of underground mines opened. Coal companies moved in and bought mineral rights from families who had no real understanding of what was actually under their land, often bought for almost nothing. The companies didn't just build mines, they built entire towns to house the workers. And every one of those towns got a name. Vicco, also partly in Knott County, was named for the Virginia Iron, Coal, and Coke Company, VICCO. Lothair was named by the Lothair Collieries. Blue Diamond was named for the Blue Diamond Coal Company. At its peak, it had around 2,000 residents. Busy, Kentucky, got its name because, according to local lore, the citizens were as busy as bees. The post office at Lennet was named because the Postal Service rejected tunnel, since a tunnel ran through the nearby ridge, so someone reversed the spelling. There's a community called Krypton. There's a community called Happy, whose name, in the words of the historical record, recalls the happy mood of a large share of the first settlers. There's a community called Typo, named because loggers would tie poles to their logs to make rafts right there at the mouth of Big Creek before sending them downriver. Tie the poles. Typo. And then there's the Combs family, whose name shows up on more creeks, hollers, post offices, and communities than anyone else in the county. Historian Thomas D. Clark wrote in 1942 that you could walk into almost any community around the North Fork, greet a stranger with, "Good morning, Mr. Combs," and be nearly certain to get it right, because there was Danger Nick Combs and Fisty Sam Combs and Bear Combs and Beat-Nosed Jerry Combs. Each had their own hollers, their post offices, and their own piece of the county. Elijah Combs had founded the place in 1795, but the family had long since spread to every tributary of the North Fork. In 1910, Perry County had about 11,000 people. By 1920, after 8 years of railroad and mines running full tilt, it had jumped to 26,000. By 1940, it peaked at nearly 48,000, and that is a county with almost no flat land, almost no farmable acreage, that more than quadrupled its population in about 30 years. Every one of those people were there because of coal. And then coal started leaving. Markets shifted, seams were depleted, the big operators pulled out, and by 1960, the population had dropped to 35,000. By 1970, it was back to 26,000, where it had been in the 1920s. Today, the county had about 28,000 people. What the coal economy left behind is complicated. It left stripped hillsides, streams running orange from acid mine drainage, and a workforce trained for one specific job that no longer exists in meaningful numbers. It left poverty. Perry County's poverty rate today is around 25%, and it left a life expectancy problem that's pretty hard to look at. Perry County men today live an average of 66.5 years old. Women live a little more than 73 years. The national averages are 76.5 and 81. That's not a minor gap, that's a decade of life missing. Researchers point to the legacy of coal mining, high rates of smoking, and obesity and low levels of physical activity, but the roots of all those issues run back to the same economic collapse of the county. The hospital in Hazard opened in 1915 as the Perry County Hospital, built during the coal boom, and when coal mining was brutal work and miners needed somewhere to go when things went wrong underground. It grew alongside the industry for decades, and after coal left, the hospital stayed. Today, Hazard ARH Regional Medical Center has around 200 beds, draws more than 150,000 patients a year, and is the largest private employer in the county. Hazard Community and Technical College has been in the county since 1968, training workers and serving as one of the region's largest employers. In 2021, Perry County launched what was described as Kentucky's first high school-based virtual reality academy at Hazard High School, a program designed to get students into emerging technology fields. The hollers that shaped Perry County's settlement and economy have always had a problem with flooding. But this was also understood pretty early on. The Army Corps of Engineers was authorized in 1938 to build a flood control dam on the Middle Fork of the Kentucky River. They finished it in 1961. The dam created Buckhorn Lake, a 1,230-acre lake tucked in the Redbird Purchase area of Daniel Boone National Forest. Today, Buckhorn Lake State Resort Park sits there with hiking trails, fishing, boating, and a lodge. In 1957, before the dam was even finished, Hazard was hit with 17 feet of floodwater on Main Street. 5 people died, 70 buildings were destroyed, 300 homes were damaged. The total damage in today's dollars was close to $1 billion. And in July of 2022, it happened again, but worse. 14 to 16 inches of rain fell over 5 days. Entire communities were swept away. There were over 600 helicopter rescues and countless swiftwater boat rescues. 45 people died across the region, 7 of them in Perry County. The county sheriff told CNN that the storm had completely destroyed the infrastructure, including water, telephone, internet, and electricity, and roads. Nearly 2,300 houses were damaged beyond repair. Almost 80% of the homes destroyed weren't even in the floodplain. Almost none of the people who applied for housing assistance had flood insurance, because why would they need it? As far as famous folk go in the county, Gene Ritchie was born in 1922 in Viper, a community 5 miles south of Hazard, named for the snakes found near the original town site. Ritchie grew up in a family that had preserved Appalachian ballads across generations, learning them the same way other families passed down recipes or stories, by ear, around the house, from the oldest people to the youngest. She brought that music out of the mountains and played it for audiences who had never even heard of a mountain dulcimer before. She played Carnegie Hall. She recorded for Elektra Records in the early 1950s at a time when folk music from Appalachia was almost invisible to the wider culture. She was pretty good friends with Pete Seeger. She influenced Bob Dylan's music. She was called the mother of folk, and when she died in 2015 at the age of 92, she was buried in the county where she was born. Shelby Lee Adams was born in Hazard in 1950. He became one of the most recognized documentary photographers in the county, spending decades turning his camera on the mountain communities of eastern Kentucky, including the same one he grew up in. His work won the World Press Photo Award. It appeared in major museums and galleries. But we do have to talk about the Mother Goose House. In 1935, a Hazard man named George Stacy had a goose for Thanksgiving. After his wife finished preparing the bird, Stacy looked at the skeleton and had an idea. He used it as a scale model and spent 5 years building a house in the shape of a goose, circular stone walls for the body, a neck and head rising from the roof, beak, eyes, and everything. He finished it in 1940. It was featured on Oprah, it was in the New York Times, it was on HGTV's Extreme Homes. In March 2021, heavy rain and snow soaked the wooden frame inside the goose's neck, causing the head to fall off. But the owner said she will rise again. The head was restored and placed back on the neck 5 months later. The house is now a bed and breakfast. Perry County September Festival is called the Black Gold Festival, and the name tells you everything about what the county celebrates and mourns. Coal was the black gold, and the festival honors that history every year in downtown Hazard. In July 1999, Hazard was the first stop on Bill Clinton's poverty tour, a trip through communities left behind by the economic boom of the 1990s. Clinton came to Perry County because Perry County represented something the decades' prosperity hadn't reached. The county had been in that position, visible, studied, documented, and still struggling for a very long time. So, that's Perry County. What'd I get wrong this time?